Order. Welcome to meeting number 67 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. This meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to House Order of June 23rd, 2022. Before we proceed, I would like to remind everyone to address all comments through the Chair. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and a motion adopted on June 20th, 2022, the Committee is resuming its study of foreign ownership and corporate concentration of fishing licences and quotas. I would like to welcome our first panel of witnesses representing Eco Trust Canada. We have Tasha Sutcliffe, Senior Policy Advisor, Fisheries. Representing the United Fishermen and Allied Workers Union, we have Kyle Lewis, Vice President, and Emily Orr, Business Agent. Thank you for taking the time to appear today. Each group will have up to 5 minutes for an opening statement, and I will invite Ms. Sutcliffe to begin, please.
Who's first?
You.
Me, okay. Thank you for having me here today. I'm currently an independent contractor, and I'm here in my role as Senior Policy Advisor for Eco Trust Canada. I also work with coastal First Nations to support the development of their community-based fisheries, a key aspect of the Fisheries Resource Reconciliation Agreement you heard Paul Correa speak to on Monday. I've spent 27 years supporting fish harvesters and fishing communities, and I believe fisheries as a renewable resource can be well managed for environmental, social, cultural, and economic objectives, and license policy is one of the key things that affects our ability to realize this. This is my third time testifying on this subject, the first time in early 2019. I want to thank this committee for keeping this topic on the table and continuing to support the people and communities of the coasts. Plural. In preparing for today, I went through license reports again, and I had a moment when I questioned why we have to continue to show the government the evidence of foreign ownership and corporate concentration in BC fisheries. We know there's foreign ownership. We know there's corporate concentration. There has been much information shared on this. We've heard of companies that link back to foreign parent companies, global companies that continue, even to this day, to buy up smaller local operators to consolidate control of supply, cash exchanges from offshore buyers to avoid tax or worse, licenses and offloading facilities owned by offshore interests, including those linked to groups like the Big Circle Boys of money laundering fame, full vertical integration of supply chains and cartel-like control of markets with no transparency, blank checks at the license broker to outbid any local operator that tries to buy in. We've heard this information and more. We've seen evidence, and we've been told how dangerous it is for those in the industry to provide details for fear of punitive action. What is so problematic, though, is that we do not know the full scope of who owns licenses and quotas in BC or where owners are from, because anyone can buy a license or quota and anyone can sign an agreement for someone else to operate it and for any fee. And we do not track this information. We do not know the true picture of who is making money from BC fishing access. And the Beneficial Ownership Survey will not provide us with answers on beneficial ownership because it did not ask the license holder if they owned the license. And in BC, the license holders often do not own them. We heard DFO explain the protections against foreign ownership in Atlantic Canada. In BC, we don't limit processor or foreign or corporate ownership of licenses, and we haven't even touched the mess of trying to track quota ownership. But what I really want to say today is that, in my opinion, focusing on the ownership being foreign and corporate isn't actually really the heart of the point. I certainly have no interest in fanning anti-Asian or any anti-sentiments. What I care about is if the fishery is working as it should be, benefiting those who are on the deck of the boat and the communities of the coast, rebuilding First Nations access and the revitalization of their fishing fleets, and supporting societal values for BC and Canada. If the current system resulted in these outcomes being achievable for fishermen, First Nations, and coastal communities, then I would not be here fighting for change. The fact is, however, that under the current regime, it is doing the opposite. Fishing enterprises are failing, good fishing crews are extremely hard to find, skippers have a huge amount of risk and work to secure a viable season if they even can, New fishermen can't afford to buy into the fishery. New fishermen are rare, period. We are losing our fleets. We are losing the benefits of the fish being pulled out of the water, and it is in large part because we're losing control of access. The point is the indisputable negative impacts of the current policy. Breaking that down, the landed value of fish is not getting to the fish harvesters, and their fishing enterprises are unstable, lack security, and are hard to keep viable. Why? Fish harvesters who run fishing enterprises are increasingly renters of access, not owners, and from year to year they have to take on the risk and cost of fishing with no security of access or price. Why? Fishing licenses and quota are way outside the range of affordability, not just because fish harvesters can't get that kind of capital, but because even if they did, they will never make enough money fishing to pay it off in their working lifetime. So why is it so high? Many reasons. First one, we have no fleet separation or owner-operator rules, and anyone can buy a license. Why would others buy a license if the fishing return on investment isn't worth that? Because they're not solely benefiting from the fishing ROI. If you have deep pockets and are further up the value chain and have access to fish markets, then you can pay more for licenses. And if you control enough supply, you can control the value chain. Or even worse, you have other nefarious activities that make this investment even more lucrative. And this situation perpetuates itself because even those buyers who do not want the huge asset investments in access must buy into the system to stay competitive with these other players. The lack of oversight and control on who can buy and operate BC fishing licenses and quota in BC is crushing our fleet. It is eliminating viable owner-operators and is putting pressure on the smaller land-based operators to consolidate and amass access themselves at great cost.
Okay, Ms. Sutcliffe, I'm going to have you to stop there. We're going a bit over on the 5-minute opening statement, and we'll move on now to our next presenter. I don't know if Mr. Lewis or Ms. Orr is giving the opening statement for 5 minutes or less, or if you're sharing your time.
Good afternoon. My name is Emily Orr. I'm the business agent for the United Fishermen and Allied Workers Union. I'd like to thank the committee for taking this incredibly important study forward, and we're very grateful to you for that. As you know, the Pacific region doesn't have a license policy to restrict foreign ownership or corporate concentration of fishing access, and the resulting situation is one where Canadian independent owner-operator fish harvesters are being outbid, outbought, and increasingly pushed out of Canada's West Coast fisheries. The benefits of commercial fishing should flow to those doing the work and taking the risk, and to the adjacent coastal communities. Coastal economies are suffering visible economic drain as those benefits go instead to offshore investors increasingly and unchecked. Reconciliation objectives involving fisheries access are challenged by competition with foreign investment and corporate concentration, and domestic food security is being willfully overlooked. The East Coast has an owner-operator policy, and you'll hear later in the study from Rick Williams, who will provide compelling statistics which compare harvester income and industry economics to compare east to west. In the delivery of the PIFCAF policy to the East Coast in 2007, Fisheries Minister Shea said, "The goal of the PIFCAF policy is to strengthen the owner-operator and fleet separation policies to ensure that inshore fish harvesters remain independent and that the benefits of fishing licenses flow to the fisher and to the Atlantic coastal communities." DFO's stated objectives of that policy are to reaffirm the importance of maintaining an independent and economically viable inshore fleet, strengthen the application of the owner-operator and fleet separation policies, ensure that the benefits of fishing licenses flow to the harvester and the coastal community, and assist fish harvesters to retain control of their fishing enterprises. These are the things that we are seeking for the West Coast. So the question that has yet to be answered is why an owner-operator policy hasn't been developed also for the West Coast. Earlier this year, the UFAWU launched a parliamentary petition to request the minister to put an immediate stop to any further foreign ownership or beneficial interest in commercial licenses and quotas. Echoing recommendation 2 of the FOPO studies, the FOPO report of sharing risk and benefits, as no tangible action by DFO with regard to this recommendation has been taken so far. In 2018, half of the $60 million in license and quota purchases were by foreign investors. 6 license holders had more than 50 licenses each. 1.2% of the quota owners hold more than 50% of the quota pounds. DFO has advised that the beneficial ownership survey is the step they've taken in response to calls for policy change. and that it's necessary to better understand the scope of the issue of foreign and corporate ownership. The survey was directed to license holders, not license owners, and this slip of semantics should effectively nullify the results of the survey, as the license holder and the license owner are not necessarily the same, which is central to the overall problem. I'm a second-generation fish harvester who, after 12 years of fishing and learning my way to running the boat myself, could not compete to buy my parents' fishing license. It ultimately sold to a processor in Vancouver, and the boat went to Alaska. In previous work as a fish coordinator for a pig fee CFE, I was responsible for tendering the licenses and quotas for those nations. 10 times out of 10, the companies outbid the independent harvesters. That year alone, that drove license lease prices up almost 50% higher. One of the lifelong harvesters I work with is currently looking to retire and sell his boat and license. The first offer came on day one from a company. Another harvester I work with fishes geoduck, which involves dangerous underwater harvest. He is responsible 100% for the physical risk, 100% for the cost of the vessel operations, the expenses of the crew, and yet receives only 22% of the landed value of the catch. These experiences are not unique, in fact, have become the norm. I'm here today on behalf of fish harvesters who still have aspirations to become owner-operators, on behalf of coastal communities who rely on fisheries to stay viable, on behalf of British Columbians concerned about domestic food security, and on behalf of Canadians who deserve better management of our common property fisheries resource. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll now get ready to go to our questions, but I will remind committee members that we have a dead stop at 6 p.m. this evening. So with permission of the committee to balance it out, it's basically 45 minutes for each session. So if we started off, instead of 6 minutes and then 5 minutes and 2.5, whatever, if we went 4 minutes for each questioner to allow everybody a good chance of getting in their questions. If the committee is okay with it, if they're not, if it's not unanimous, we'll go with the regular 6 minutes till time runs out.
We'll agree to that.
Okay. Mr. Arnold, you're up first for 4 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for bringing this testimony forward. Ms. Sutcliffe, you mentioned that fishermen can't afford to buy the licenses and quota because the returns on investment basically are not enough to justify the cost. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I've done actually quite a bit of analysis over the last year trying to look at what it would take for a fisherman to invest in a fishing license and how long it would take them to pay it off with the current prices. I can give you a real example. In sea cucumber, the currently licenses are going for $1.5 million. That's double since 2015. Most skippers lease and only get $2.25 a pound, but if you are an owner-operator, you get $9.25, so go with that number. With that number, after expenses, the average skipper would make about $40,000 of a boat share. That means it would take them, even if they had all the capital and didn't have any cost of borrowing, at least 36 years to pay off that license. So chances are they would never be able to pay it off, and I don't know anyone who's going to give a fisherman $1.5 million with no cost of financing.
Thank you. You've both mentioned that you've tracked some of the recent sales to foreign ownership, and yet we've somewhat heard that there's no way of tracking who owns what. Ms. Sutcliffe, if you could start, and then Ms. Orr, if you can elaborate on that a little further. How are you able to determine that it's foreign ownership that's picking up these licenses when I'm not clear on how it's tracked?
Really good question. It sounds like a contradiction. It is extremely hard. The foreign ownership examples that I know of and have to do with a whole bunch of digging and research in some cases. One of the examples that I mentioned about the connection that I've testified about before, it's because that person was traced through BC Online registry as the single director and shareholder of a company that's investing in BC, and they also were outed in the money laundering investigation in BC, so it was easy to track them and know who they were because it's in public record. In another case, it was just detailed online research based on an intel given by someone in the industry. And then in other cases, it's just known, like the companies admit it. They know that they're foreign owned. So
you
there's-
mentioned ties to the money laundering, the same individual with ties to the money laundering case. Is it your view that laundered money is being used for some of these licenses?
It is, I've heard that from many, many people that that is the case, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Orr, do you have any comments on how it is that we're tracking these licenses and the sales?
I think Tasha explained it fairly accurately. Beyond that, it's mostly anecdotal. It's stories that you hear from fish harvesters, processors, buyers. So it's information that comes sometimes firsthand, sometimes secondhand, but that is the problem, is that we don't have an actual track of it. So.
Okay, thank you. And I guess for both of you, is there an indication that the government funding going into the buyback programs is affecting the license sale prices at all? And how is it affecting them if it is?
Yes. Do you want to elaborate?
Go ahead, Tasha.
Yeah, it's definitely affects it. It's known to have affected over years. Buybacks always amp up prices. I think that it's taken advantage of by certain individuals in the broker side as well. And I think in a lot of cases, fishermen do deserve the prices that they get in those buybacks, but there's definitely a dynamic that can result in overinflation of prices from government buybacks, definitely.
Okay, thank you for that. Before I go to Mr. Hardy, I will say to the witnesses, if there's a time that you haven't been able to provide an answer, you can actually email an answer into the clerk and it'll be included in the testimony. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 4 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm going to be a little bit, just a second here. I've got some audio problems. My headset doesn't appear to be working very well, but I hope you're able to hear me okay.
We are able to hear you okay.
Sorry, what were you saying, sir?
We are able to hear you best kind.
All right, good, thank you. All right, to Ms. Orr, at the Fishing for Communities sessions in Victoria a few months ago, we saw a chart that said that the harvesters were getting, of the share of the money coming out of the ocean, the harvesters were realizing about $400 million a year, but that was the gross amount. Do you have any idea what the net looks like for the average independent harvester out there who may be having to rent both the license and the quota?
I can help with some specific examples. For example, in prawn, there have been years where the leases are upwards of $70,000. So before the harvester goes fishing, paying that lease price, the license fees before they head out, which is near $6,000, paying for all of their vessel, outfitting the gear, the fuel, everything that is required to undergo the fishing activity. Depending on what that harvester lands is going to give you what their profit margin might look like. But as somebody who leases the license, if you're indentured to your fish processing company, if they've provided the loan to purchase or to lease a license, you are going to be fishing for the price that buyer is willing to pay you. So it varies radically between fisheries, value of fish, and of course there's a lot of unknowns with what the price is going to be each year for many of the fish species. So it's
okay,
difficult.
I'll have to leave it at that because I do have limited time. Ms. Sutcliffe, above and beyond the money, I want you to tell the committee what you presented in Victoria about the other considerations that go far, far beyond the economics of this. The cultural, the community values, et cetera, et cetera. Talk about the full picture, if you could, please.
Thanks, Ken. Yes. It's more than I could ever say in a few minutes, but there are a plethora of values that we see in coastal communities as a result of a thriving fishing community, everything from the infrastructure that supports so many other aspects of coastal community health and well-being, including wharves and docks and and people who are providing skills like mechanics, but there's also a lot to be said about the social and cultural values around the provision of food, the relationships, the understanding and the stewardship of the marine resource that's adjacent to you, your ability to interact with that. Certainly for the First Nations I work with, the ability to maintain boats and skills to access traditional foods is also a huge part of maintaining your fleet. I mean, I would love, I will actually provide some of that information in a brief to the committee as well, because it's much more than I could ever describe or give credit to in a few minutes here. And if I could just use 1 minute, I don't know if anyone has minutes to spare, but I just want to say that Kyle, our colleague here, is a commercial fisherman. He has a really important story to share in relation to this, and he didn't get a chance to testify, and I believe he prepared something, and I'd be willing to give up time and put my answers to questions in a submission to get some time freed up for him if there's a way to do that.
Well, I would presume my time is just about up. Yeah, it is. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. Before I go to Madam Debian, I will say that, in rounds of questioning, Mr. Lewis might be able to get out some of his opening statement or remarks in answers. So, but other than that, it is provided to the committee in a written form. So it is, the committee members have that on record as well. So we'll now go to Madam Debian for 4 minutes or less, please.
Well, I would say something similar is happening on the East Coast, especially in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. We have concerns as well. And what we're mostly concerned about is the fact that we've even heard that people wanted to be able to testify anonymously. So I tell you, that's very concerning. It makes the hair stand up on our head. I think I'd like to listen now to Kyle. I'll give him his 2 minutes because I'd like to hear this.
Thank you, Caroline. I appreciate that. First and foremost, I just want to acknowledge the Anishinaabe Algonquin people whose unceded territory that we're meeting on today. My name is Kyle Lewis. I'm the Vice President for the United Fishermen's and Allied Workers Union, and I'm also an active fish harvester. I'd like to thank the committee for their time and effort spent on this study in this ever so important fisheries industry. I'm a fourth-generation harvester that's feeling the pinch from foreign ownership and the lack of an owner-operator policy. The very fact that I'm able to be in front of you today is a direct result of this. Our BC prawn fishery kicks off in 4 days, and I'm without a license. Why, you may ask? I'll bring you up to speed on my current situation that myself and other harvesters are facing. I'd taken out a loan to refit my boat to allow me to fish prawns and salmon with one vessel. I bid on a license through a process where when you're outbid, you're able to do a counter bid. So not only was I outbid by 140%, the sudden interest was from an overseas investor who was looking to secure as much licenses and product as possible. This license was also a pick fee license. Pick fee was created to increase Indigenous capacity within commercial fisheries, but there's zero DFO policy to ensure that Indigenous commercial harvesters get first access at reasonable lease rates, which results in people like myself either not being able to compete to lease licenses or having to get companies to finance at lease rates where we end up having to pay back the majority of the value of our catch to a company. I can't afford to compete with these companies to buy my own license, so my only option, therefore, is to lease. Running a commercial fishing business is expensive, with most of the costs and financial risks having to be paid up front. This is just not financially viable when we're only taking home about 20% of the value of our catch, and that's before taxes. That's just a quick snapshot of what myself and a lot of other BC independent fishermen have been and are currently dealing with. So again, I thank you for your time and consideration on these issues.
Thank you. You still have a little over a minute, Madame Debian.
Oh, merci.
Thank you. Then I will continue with Ms. Sutcliffe. What would you say will be the impact on fisheries in Canada, generally speaking, if we're not able to control this foreign investment? What will the long-term impact be?
Yes, well, again, I think I want to separate the idea of foreign investment from foreign ownership and control of the supply of the fishing access, because I think those are fundamentally two different things and they have two different impacts. I think that there are examples and cases where we've had companies in BC that have foreign investment or have foreign owners who've been very good participants in the fishery, good partners in the fishery, good citizens, I'd even say, in the communities that they have operations in. And there's also very difficult examples. And so it really depends on the model. What's happening now is that these forms of investment from very large corporate interests are coming in and taking control of the supply and the whole vertical integration of the supply chain. And as a result, the money that gets left in communities and our ability to build on that and to even do sort of new and innovative things with our supply becomes very restricted and limited. And I think that is damaging, not just for BC, but anywhere that continues to exist. But I wouldn't want to say that I'm not taking a position here that there's no role for corporations and there's no role for investment or foreign investment, because I think there's also been positive examples of opportunities created out of that. So I just think we need to look at the impact of the policy and what's causing the most damage.
Thank you, Madam Debian. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 4 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today, Ms. Sutcliffe, Ms. Orr, and Mr. Lewis. Nice to see the three of you. I wish I was there in person, but thank you for being here. Ms. Sutcliffe, my first question is for you, and I'm wondering if you can expand on, we've all heard DFO's statements around that British Columbia has been necessarily different than that on the East Coast due to the policy being built on conservation objectives. And I'm wondering if you can expand on that and what is your response to those claims?
Yes, thank you for that question. I have to say there's very few things that frustrate me more than that line that we keep hearing, with the exception maybe being the line of the scrambled omelet. I think we have to remember that the issue that we are having around the control of access to our fisheries is not does not negate our ability to meet our conservation objectives. We're not even talking about the flexibility that may be needed in some fisheries for fishermen to trade amongst each other for things like bycatch needs. We're talking about who is owning and controlling the licenses and quota. You can still put limits and controls around who gets to be eligible for owning licenses and quota and still meet all of those conservation objectives and still meet all of that flexibility around trading for bycatch and all of the other aspects that people always talk about, such as very good monitoring systems. None of those things have to be affected by saying that we don't want corporate concentration of our licenses and quota. It's a false dichotomy, and I really wish that we'd stop hearing that line from the department.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sutcliffe. My next question is for Ms. Orr. Ms. Orr, why do you think that the survey is realistically the only step that we've seen taken to date by DFO in response to the 2019 FOPO report, which had extensive recommendations based on witness testimony? And also, can you expand on the survey that has gone out and your comments around the difference between license holders and license owners and the implications of that survey not considering the differences?
Thank you. I think the survey being flawed as to who it's asking the questions of is what's causing the difficulty in what results are going to come from it. So my comments around that are that the survey is not going to provide the answers. It's not going to provide the information or the data that's useful to answering what the foreign ownership or corporate concentration picture actually looks like. And sorry, the first question again?
The first question was just your thoughts around why we have seen minimal action around the recommendations that have been put forward in the 2019 report.
And my understanding is it's a capacity issue. That's the reason that DFO has provided to us.
Okay, thank you. And what has been the petition that you put forward, Ms. Orr? Can you expand on why you put forward that petition and the reactions that you have been receiving to date?
The reactions were shock. Most people that we talked to about the petition They had no idea that Canada didn't already have some restriction on foreign ownership or corporate concentration. People were horrified that Canada would allow an open black market on our fisheries resource. We put that petition forward because we needed to bring the attention back to this issue and for DFO to take some serious steps to making some resolutions on fixing the problem. So the petition was to bring that attention forward in hopes to drive closer to change for it.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. We'll now go to Mr. Small for 4 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is to Ms. Orr. So, if licenses are held now by non-fishers, whoever, they're in different walks of life or whatnot, how do you who, in your opinion, should be holding these licenses?
Thank you. Independent owner-operator harvesters and First Nations are the ones that should be holding the licenses.
Okay, so just say we started unraveling that sweater. What's your vision for making changes to that? And would these license holders have to be compensated? Would there be some type of a redistribution scheme? And who'd be eligible then to pick up those licenses? This is massive, according to what you've said to us here today.
It is. I think it's a complex solution that we need to look at. First, I think the stop to foreign ownership. Second is fleet separation. Third is the development of an owner-operator policy. On the East Coast, they were given 7 years to transition between 2007 and 2014. That 7 years was provided so that investors had time to divest. I think that there's a couple of different models for the solution of how to do that. One of them is perhaps the government, DFO, retrieving those licenses back and then reissuing them to independent owner-operators. And another is in an open market style, whereas those licenses are sold by the license owners back to independent owner-operators in the same way that they are now, but with the impending deadline of those sort of armchair fishermen having to divest. A license bank for BC would be, a provincial loan board for BC, I think would be a really important part of that. And BC and Alberta are the only provinces in Canada that don't have that. That type of loan program provincially helps East Coast harvesters, owner-operators to become more involved and to refit or buy licenses, buy vessels. That type of program would help owner-operators on the West Coast to pick up those licenses that would be let go.
So how successful do you think that new program is in Atlantic Canada? Do you think it's achieved its goals, or do you think that certain groups or individuals are skirting around that and rigging it up another way, but it actually still exists? Do you think that's possible in Atlantic Canada? Do you think that would end up happening in BC at the end of the day?
I know that's happening on the East Coast by my conversations with our sister union, the FFAW. I think that it's not perfect. I think we can learn a lot from the way that they develop their program. What I do know is, and you'll see from Rick Williams when he testifies, is that there are some really compelling tax filer data statistics from fish harvesters on the East Coast, and there's some really good data around the landings values going to communities on the East Coast since the introduction of PIF-CAF. I think it's not a perfect program. It's certainly miles better than what we are dealing with on the West Coast.
So if individuals had or corporations had to divest of these licenses, where do you think the price would go? Do you think the price would drop and be more, and those licenses would be more affordable to harvesters, or would they maintain at the level that they're at, and that possibly not even the Fisheries Loan Board would be able to provide financing?
I think that's a tricky question to answer in advance. I think you would see the values stay the same probably for the first while. I know that a Fisheries Loan Board, some of the examples on the East Coast of Canada, they offer loans upwards of $1 million. That would be significant on the West Coast for having somebody be able to achieve owner-operator status and buying a license in a vessel. It's difficult to say what would happen in terms of the volume, because on the West Coast, I think we have a huge number of corporate-owned licenses and quotas. And so to see that sort of trickle out into a new set of ownership it would be interesting to see and predict for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Small. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 4 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start with Ms. Sutcliffe. Ms. Sutcliffe, do you think it's normal that in 2023, our Canadian resources that belong to Canadians is so easily accessed by foreign corporations?
Sorry, I missed the first part of the question. Can you just repeat the framing?
Est-ce que vous trouvez...
Do you think it's normal that in 2023 that Canadian resources, like fisheries, are so easily accessible to foreign interests and corporations?
Thank you for the question. I guess it depends on the definition of normal. I guess, unfortunately, I think in Canada, this is seen across a lot of our sectors, and it is become somewhat normal. But I definitely don't think that it's good because of the havoc it's wreaking on our ability to participate more fully in the benefits of the resources. So again, for me, it's not so much about who it is or where they are, it's the impact, and it is definitely instrumental in affecting the decline of the benefits we're seeing from our fisheries.
Alors,
Then what would be your solution in order to have a win-win situation, whether it be for the fishers, the workers, the plants? What do you see as a solution? What would you propose to in the way of changing the way things work?
I think I would repeat very much what Emily said. It would definitely limit future foreign ownership and investment in licenses and quota, fleet separation policy and owner-operator policy definitely. And as Emily said, a multi-year transition to get there. No one is talking about people suddenly losing their assets with no compensation, or about this being something that happens overnight. We're talking about, recognizing this will take time, needing to put supports in place for harvesters to be able to finance. And I will add that I do think from some of my recent analysis that licenses would go down in value. I know they're extremely expensive in Atlantic Canada, but that is more proportional to an extremely valuable fishery. I think licenses that are overinflated well beyond the production value will go down because they're overinflated for other reasons. Other fisheries will not go down because they actually are worth that much money because they're that valuable a fishery.
merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Ms. Orr, I know that Unifor represents many workers throughout the country. In terms of, I know we're speaking about fisheries right now, but there are other sectors in our economy where foreign investment is allowed. For example, the tech sector, oil and gas, for example. So why do you think things should be done differently in the fisheries? Why do you think those foreign investments should be prohibited or reduced? Why would we do things differently?
Thank you. It's important to recognize that we're not asking for no foreign involvement or no foreign business to take place inside of our fisheries economy. What we don't want is the vertical integration of those companies so that they are taking the entire chain from taking the fish out of the water, the value of the fish, to the transport, overseas transport, and the full line from start to finish. So when we have that level of vertical integration, it makes it incredibly difficult for owner-operators to compete. We know of companies that are headquartered overseas but have branches in Canada. They're fish buyers. That's not, I don't think, the issue. I don't think anyone here is saying that's the issue. It's that when they take the bulk of the licenses and quotas and control the productivity of the fish, that's where we have the problem.
Thank you, Mr. Cormier. That's all the time we have now for this first session, or the first 45 minutes. I want to thank, of course, Ms. Orr, Ms. Sutcliffe, and Mr. Lewis for appearing before committee again today, and for sharing their knowledge with the committee as we try and embark to get this study done and a good report written on it. And like I said earlier, if there's anything you think you didn't get a chance to say today, by all means, please submit it to the clerk, and we'll make sure it gets included in the study as well. So again, we'll suspend for a moment now as we switch out panels and start up for the last bit of our committee meeting. Welcome back. I would now like to welcome our witnesses for the second hour. Appearing as an individual, we have Jennifer Silver, Associate Professor, University of Guelph. Representing the Fisheries Council of Canada, of course, no stranger to committee, Mr. Paul Landsbergen, President. And representing Nuchanut Seafood Limited Partnership, we have Andrew Olson, Chief Executive Officer. You have exactly 5 minutes each for opening statements. So we'll start with Mr. Silver, please. Ms. Silver, please.
Yeah, thank you. Really happy for the invitation to be here, so thank you for that. The topic is timely, important, relates to urgent questions that we've been hearing about already about who benefits from the culturally significant, nutritious, and economically valuable fish in our exclusive economic zone. I spoke to FOPO in 2019 about my West Coast research. I'm going to overview some relevant points from that work today that do indeed point to concentration, and I'm going to use the last couple of minutes to summarize some arguments from scholarly literature about why fisheries access and benefits ought to be systematically considered by state-led management systems like the one we have in Canada. So with respect to the West Coast research, the starting point, which is now review at this point, as you've heard from folks in the first session, is that harvesting operations can register and hold numerous licenses in different types of quota. In turn, they can participate in a range of fisheries or earn revenue by leasing out some of all of their licenses and quota to others. And these licenses and quota can get very expensive. The research that I have led counted all West Coast licenses registered in 2019, so within a single year, noting who held what and how many. License holding and identification information came from a publicly available spreadsheet. My research has largely focused, actually exclusively focused on publicly available information. So the spreadsheet can be downloaded. It's very complicated. There are hundreds of thousands of lines in the spreadsheet and many, many columns. We use computer code to basically extract and match identifying information across licenses and fisheries. So just quickly, in 2019, we counted 6,563 licenses registered by 2,377 unique holders. There were indeed a small number of holders, 38 in fact, that had 20 or more licenses and 6 that had 5 or more. And together these 38 holding entities, be they individuals, companies, so on, controlled 26% of all West Coast licenses in 2019. There were 1,357 with one license only and 499 with 2 licenses only, and these together accounted for 36% of all licenses. As you've again now heard a number of times, in contrast to the Atlantic region policy that defines and supports an inshore owner-operator fleet, no such distinction exists in the Pacific region, and there are no limits on what a holding entity, be it fisherman, processor, or speculative investor, can hold. License holding, leasing arrangements, and other types of economic arrangements do not get considered in the context of fisheries evaluation, and they're not considered against any type of socioeconomic objective. In this sense, access and the distribution of benefits to Pacific fisheries are left to market forces. Turning to the last minute or two of my time, I want to relay fisheries science and marine policy research relevant to Canada, as well as other countries that have similar fisheries management systems. So these points are pertinent beyond the Pacific region and in contemplation of foreign and speculative investment. So the first point is that foreign financing and ownership shape industrial fisheries and seafood value chains. In 2016, a meta-study was published that documented the size and disproportionate size and international reach of a small handful of private transnational corporations. They estimated that 13 transnationals controlled 11 to 16% of all marine catch and 19 to 40% of catch from the largest and most valuable stocks. These firms own and operate subsidiaries. About 6 or 7 of the transnationals owned 100 or more subsidiaries. The authors of this study observed that the firms are large and powerful. Their business activities usually encompass numerous nodes across seafood value chains, and they, quote, frequently pursue strategic mergers with major market or quota holders via direct acquisitions. To conclude, the second message from the literature is optimistic. It is entirely possible, fisheries science tells us, to rebuild fish stocks such that year after year yields stabilize and grow. The science-based benchmarking approach plays a critical role, and the 2019 amendments to the Federal Fisheries Act helped to make rebuilding, monitoring, and benchmarking build it into DFO's Integrated Fisheries Management Plan framework. This committee knows that rebuilding fish stocks requires a lot of work. It's intensive, it's expensive. Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities throughout coastal Canada have and continue to put their hands up to lead, support, and invest in this work, especially the work of rebuilding or supporting ecosystem health and function. The federal government also plays a leadership role through funding, science, and the costs of management. So we as a country are and will continue to invest in fisheries rebuilding, and this is the right course of action. Science tells us that investment pays off for ecosystems, people, and pocketbooks. The question of this study is whose pocketbooks, and that question is still open, an open policy question. And so for this reason, access and benefits must be seen to be squarely under the purview of fisheries management policy and not left entirely to market forces.
Thank you. We'll work our way across the table now. Go to Mr. Landsbergen for 5 minutes or less, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Committee, for the invitation to appear before you today. As many of you know, the Fisheries Council of Canada is the national association representing wild capture processors across the country, and all of our members harvest as well. FCC members are all privately owned. Most are family owned and operated, and some for multiple generations. Some are Indigenous community owned and operated, and many of these have specific mandates to invest back in their communities. And a few members are processor companies or co-ops owned by a group of independent inshore harvesters. All of our companies care about their employees, their partners, and their communities. They are responsible stewards of our resources, and collectively, we promote a healthy resource and a prosperous industry. And I should note that even our largest companies are relatively small compared to global competitors. On the whole, I would say that we should be celebrating the successes of our entrepreneurs that have worked hard to build their businesses and have been able to grow from owning one fish plant to 2 to 3 or more. The same goes for those who have been successful enough to expand beyond one vessel. Being successful and contributing back to one's community should be celebrated and not seen as a negative outcome. As a small open economy, Canada has always struggled with industrial policy to support growth of Canadian companies and entrepreneurs. This is very difficult, and market forces are much more dynamic than the speed at which government policy tends to move. I should note that in fisheries, the supply chain is much more integrated than what appears from government policy on paper. In many ways, the success of processors depends on the success of harvesters and vice versa. And Mr. Chair, as the committee knows, DFO is conducting a beneficial ownership survey, and earlier this week, DFO reported preliminary results for Atlantic Canada that some 98% of licenses are domestically owned. And I suspect the eventual result in BC won't be vastly different than this. And I look forward to the full results to add more evidence to this discussion. I would like to make some comments about foreign investment, in part to differentiate it from foreign ownership. The seafood sector, as many of you know, is a tough business, and for those outside the industry, it's difficult to understand the sector, and this also goes for financial institutions. As such, our sector can be underappreciated by lending institutions, leading companies to solicit funds outside of our chartered banks and possibly at higher rates. Foreign financial institutions that understand the sector can be an attractive option for companies making large investments. An example would be Icelandic banks interested in lending to Canadian companies. I don't see this necessarily as a negative thing. We certainly aren't the only sector in Canada having to look outside our borders for financial capital, and we need to continue to invest to compete and meet customer expectations. The other element of this study is corporate concentration. The Competition Bureau uses 4-firm concentration ratio. If the top 4 firms have less than 65% of the relevant market, the Bureau is generally not concerned. Even beyond this threshold, other factors are considered before making a judgment on market power. Beside the threshold number, the other key to this ratio is the definition of relevant market. Seafood is the most globally traded food commodity. I would argue that the relevant market is not a town, a county, a province, a region, or even Canada as a whole. It would even be tough to argue, perhaps, that even North America is a relevant market for most Canadian fisheries. We export to upwards of 130 countries annually. Our imports for the domestic market come from as many as 150 countries. With all due respect, and not to diminish the importance of this study, I have to admit that I'm preoccupied by other challenges. I'm focusing on how DFO addresses gaps in fishery science and its implications on fisheries management decisions and broader policy work. I'm focusing on ensuring our sector is meaningfully consulted on marine conservation. And I'm focused on how to ensure Indigenous reconciliation is based on voluntary relinquishment of commercial licenses. These are the key issues affecting the prosperity and the future of our sector and my members. And I thank you for your attention and look forward to your questions.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Olson, please, for 5 minutes or less.
Thanks. My name is Andy Olson. I'm the CEO of New Seafood. We're a commercial fishing enterprise that's owned wholly by 5 First Nations on the west coast of Vancouver Island, and we're part of the PIC-FEE program. We also own St. Jean's Cannery in Nanaimo through our company as well. So I'll begin my talk about foreign ownership and corporate control in the Pacific region. There's a real concern with foreign ownership and corporate control in the fisheries resources of Canada. It impacts the cost of reconciliation, and the risk to Canada and its citizens are significant, from the loss of opportunity and the benefits for Indigenous, rural, and coastal communities to the impacts on the cost to re-enter and buy back licenses and quota access. The next steps to me are evident, and that's protecting Canada's fisheries resource as a strategic asset. The work has already begun with Canada's rare mineral resources, and fisheries should begin immediately. This type of fulsome government review and process would begin to unravel the damage from the last 150 years of business as usual. Indigenous, rural, and coastal communities are the backbone of Canada's coast, and without benefits from local resources and work opportunities staying in their areas, they can't survive. Without these coastal and rural communities, who's going to monitor the vast areas or the border and contentious food security issues? If we continue down this path, Canada will be buying back its own seafood from people that control it in corporate offices or foreign countries. The cost of reconciliation isn't going to stop growing while resources like licenses and quota are being sold into an uncontrolled market that allows for foreign ownership, corporate concentration, and investor speculation. Unfettered access to licenses and quota for sale to foreign owners wasn't allowed in the past, and until about 20 years ago, a company owning fishing licenses had to have the majority of its directors be Canadian citizens. This restriction has been dropped entirely. Foreign investment is one thing. Control of Canadian resources by a foreign and unknown organization is another, and very concerning. The recent license and quota ownership survey was a complete failure at anything but pointing out that Canada knows nothing about who owns or controls licenses in the Pacific region. Corporate concentration, foreign ownership, and investor speculation doesn't end at the licenses and quota, but now extends into the primary production and processing side. This means they control the ice, the dock unloading, the cold storage, the processing, and the distribution networks. Harvesters should be partners and share the benefits rather than taking most of the risk and much less of the reward. Right now, with the control of licenses, the control of the shore equipment, and in some cases control of the fishing vessels, harvesters are left in the middle with a smaller and smaller share of the revenue. The few companies left are almost all or in part or wholly owned by a large corporation or foreign investors. They work with license and quota holders, owners, and investors, and do so to add a layer of cost, with high lease rates making it harder for fishers to make a living. In some dive fisheries, if you aren't working with selected buyers, it can be difficult, if not impossible, to get your products hauled to market by one of the few trucking companies that carries live seafood. In this last summer, I heard fishers that couldn't get ice and fuel because they weren't working with the few companies that were buying large volumes of salmon. When companies make harvesters beholden to them with aggressive and sometimes unfair practices, it makes it more challenging for them to survive. When large companies with vast amounts of licenses and quota don't work with Indigenous, local, and rural coastal communities, but instead send resources to metropolitan areas, or even in some cases, other countries for processing, the benefits are lost to Canada, other than to the shareholder that benefits the few that can afford to invest. Canada needs to move fisheries into a strategic asset program and protect them for future Canadians, Indigenous and non-Indigenous coastal and rural communities. This work needs to begin immediately so we don't lose what's left and we can begin to rebuild what is gone. Programs like the Blue Economy, PICFI, NICFI, AICFI, and the Ocean Supercluster should be growing the whole Canadian economy and support locally owned, Indigenous owned, and coastal community supported businesses and people. As programs like AICFI and NICFI and PICFI are trying to support Indigenous people engaging in commercial fisheries, they're forced to compete with foreign interests and investor speculation while spending Canadian taxpayers' money. As funds are committed to the budgets, the prices continue to rise, outpacing the funding and leaving Indigenous groups behind, left to find ways to bridge the gap. Wouldn't it be a disaster for Canada to find out in the not too distant future that a large portion of its food and fisheries resources were owned by another nation or foreign controlled company? I don't think we want to see that happen.
Thank you for that. We'll now go to our first round of questioning with Mr. Small for 4 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question to Mr. Olson, you finished off there with by mentioning food security. That's interesting. Ultimately, what could be the worst result in terms of national food security if more foreign ownership occurs?
Well, there's a reason that they want to control the access to the food. And it's because they know they need food in other places. And they want to control that they are able to reassure that they're going to have future access to controlling those resources one way or another through the harvest, the processing, the value adding, whatever it takes. They're going to control every piece of that action. And the problem is that we are the ones left beholden to those organizations. And we don't know who even owns them. We don't know where they're owned, who owns them, where the fish is going. In many cases, the fish goes to other countries to be processed and then is brought back here to be sold. We don't know if it's the same fish. There's counterfeiting issues. There's all kinds of concerns.
Mr. Olson, again, do you have independent owner-operators there in BC, a percentage still?
I'd say it's a very small percent that still is owner-operator. One of the challenges that we're up against is fishermen, rather than retire and sell their license, the license itself has enabled them to stay on as essentially a landlord. They become a landlord rather than an active fisherman and derive revenue from a piece of paper that they had the opportunity to buy because they had the capital at the time when it was for sale to buy it. The fisherman doesn't have that access.
So are they now, Mr. Olson, again, are they able to shop their fish around in a competitive nature or not?
Well, fishers that are buying or leasing their access through companies are often either leasing so they may come to me to lease a license from my PICFI CFE, for example, and then they'll go to the fishing company to borrow the money, and so that company then controls that fish. And they're the ones that are going to tell that fisherman how much they're going to pay for that fish at the end of the day. So they may or may not control the license on one way or the other, but they're going to control the price in that way. So the fishermen are beholden to them because they have to get the money to get the license. These costs are now borne. An owner-operator owns his license. He pays the license fees to Canada, goes fishing. Now, when a leaseor, Kyle, for example, leases a license, that lease cost is borne by everyone on that vessel. So the owner of the vessel that owns the license is now spreading that cost to his crew. All of the crew are having to absorb those costs now where before they didn't. An owner-operator wouldn't have that cost, and it wouldn't be a vessel expense. It would have been an individual expense.
So if this corporate concentration exists the way you speak of it, well, what would be the solution? It seems like a complicated outfit.
It's going to take some complex work, but one of the things that you need to think about is a license is an opportunity to go fishing. If we look at it as an opportunity to go fishing, which is what it should be, like a driver's license. You get a driver's license, you get to go drive your car because you've taken the test, you paid the fee. Licenses in the Pacific region have become a physical asset, just like real estate. And that's why you've seen the same thing happen as real estate speculation and investors bringing foreign dollars that may or may not be based in real business. There's foreign speculation and investor speculation with money that's laundered, and it's a complex thing, but it needs to be dealt with sooner than later, because if it continues, it's just going to get worse.
Thank you, Mr. Small. We'll now go to Mr. Callaway for 4 minutes or less, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and it's great to see the three of you here. And our last panel is it's been very informative. We talked about owner-operator on this panel and the previous panel, and how important it is to the East Coast, and the fact that it's enshrined in law. It's a massive move forward in terms of communities, community wealth, and constantly will need to be improved upon. And something really tweaked with me. I believe it was you, Mr. Olson. I think you might have referred to it as well, Dr. Silver. You talked about the foreign concentration. I come from an island in the first part of the 20th century, first 5 decades, where you had one company who owned an enormous amount of mines, and they were called the company. Now, the company also had the company stores that were owned by the company. The homes were called company homes, where the workers, lived. And that wasn't too long ago, in terms of the concentration of corporate wealth and how things consolidate and choices are few, and in particular in people that work in those industries, in the mining industry. So it got me thinking about BC, and I don't want to say there's absolutely 1,000% comparisons here, but it got me thinking, Dr. Silver, on a couple of things in your work. So you talked about the research you've done, and I'm curious, have you done any modeling with respect to owner-operator in BC if it were to have a more robust presence in BC, and what that would mean in terms of the supply chain, money staying in community, and also money staying with local fishers in terms of local entrepreneurs? Is there any data that you could share or at least pontificate on in terms of if we were to look at that model, and I can't give the parameters of if we switched at 50% or 75% or 30%, but I'm just curious because I would suspect that would have a profound number attached to it for local communities where we're talking and consistently talking about rural economic strategies, coastal economic strategies. To me, the heart of those rural economic strategies is keeping money in the community.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate your intro. Sounds like you're from Cape Breton. I'm born and raised Nova Scotian, so okay. I don't actually, Ms. Sutcliffe from the first round, I know that she's done some work to look at the sort of multiplier.
She's also going to send me some information.
I bet she will. What you're talking about is the sort of multiplier effect is if we, So the way that I would approach this question, so in short, I don't have specific numbers for you, but the way that I would approach this question is to say that lots of sort of coastal history and fisheries history in BC tells us that communities a lot up and down the coast were once thriving and had things like, lots of active vessels tied up on the dock, small, medium-sized processing plants that are running many months of the year. People need to get their nets fixed. People need to get their engines serviced for their vessels. So that's evidence to show us how once when the structure of the fishery was different than it is today, that there were thriving businesses associated with the fishery that were not even just, they were well beyond the harvesters themselves, keeping those communities active and busy. And some of those communities, Prince Rupert, for example, Ucluelet, lots of different communities up and down the coast are visibly not the same as they once were. So to help illustrate what I know Tasha will send you, that's how I'd answer that question.
Thank you, Mr. Kellaway. A couple of seconds over. We'll now go to Madame Debienne for 4 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for Mr. Landsbergen. Earlier, you said that you are concerned more about the protection of the resource. So, what we've heard is that there is more vertical integration. And we see that competition actually is ending up concentrated in this vertical integration. So when you're talking about the protection of a resource, then this becomes even more problematic. Do you not agree?
Well, I think there's a couple elements here. I think we need more data on how much concentration there is, and also the behavior that we see from companies in the sector. If we're responsible stewards, then the resource will be there and it will be sustainable for future generations. And Canada is second in the world in terms of third-party certification of sustainable fisheries management practices by the industry. So I'm not too worried about that. I think, as I said, we need more data to better inform some of these questions.
Merci. Thank you. Ms. Silver. I'd like to hear your perspective on the following. Do you think that fisheries products should be a protected resource? Do you think that fisheries should be managed by the Competition Bureau, for example?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So, I mean, fisheries are a public resource to be managed to the benefit of Canadians. One way I will answer that question, or the way I'll answer it, is I suppose with reference to, I dug up in preparation the way that a country like New Zealand looks at this, so have very valuable fisheries resources. And they actually have an overseas investment office in addition to fisheries minister looking at any sort of foreign interests that want to buy quota or to buy or become partial owners of fishing entities and processing entities. So I'll just quote to you from this is a briefing document produced by the U.S. State Department. This investment oversight legislation, quote, operating together with the Fisheries Act in New Zealand, requires consent from the relevant ministers in order for an overseas person to obtain an interest in a fishing quota or an interest of 25% or more in a business that owns or controls fishing quota. So, look, I don't think that anybody is arguing there should be no foreign investment, no element of foreign ownership in the fisheries. I think what I've found as a researcher is it's just not as transparent as one might want, even to be able to come to a committee like this and answer questions and bring evidence. And we know that there are other countries that have valuable fisheries resource that treat it as a strategic resource because it's valuable. And then there are these questions related to food sovereignty and that sort of stuff that comes up as well. So I think there are lessons to be learned from legislation and approaches that in other countries that see it as a public resource and more than that, sort of strategic.
Thank you, Madame Debienne. That's exactly your 4 minutes gone, just like that. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 4 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to the witnesses, Dr. Silver, Mr. Landsbergen, and Mr. Olson. My first question is to Mr. Olson. Mr. Olson, first, thank you for all the work that you do through Nuu-chah-nulth First Nations, Nuu-chah-nulth Seafood, and the St. Jean's Cannery. It's nice to see you in Ottawa while I'm in Nanaimo right now. My question was, we heard from the coastal First Nations around the ways in which corporate and investor in a letter to DFO. They wrote about the corporate and investor concentration and growing offshore ownership of licenses and quota driving up prices, and the way that this license concentration and offshore ownership is threatening West Coast fisheries, but also directly, further to this, directly impeding the important process of reconciliation with Indigenous people and their ability to access fisheries. And I'm wondering if you can share a little bit around some of those thoughts that we've been hearing from others.
That's so as an organization that's based on owning and managing licenses and quota for fishermen to participate in the fishing business. It's my job to try and buy or access more licenses and quota for our company to be able to enable more fishermen to participate in the fishing business. I can't buy licenses and quota in the current market without a subsidy from the federal government in the form of a grant that offsets the cost. Otherwise, the return on the investment doesn't make sense for my directors, and I can't take it to them as a viable business investment. It doesn't make sense. And that's the situation that groups like the Coastal First Nations are in, because they're not getting that grant. That this is the money that they've been given. They have a limited amount to spend, and that's what they're using. And when the budget of the licenses continue to increase from the time that the agreement is signed until they're out on the market to buy the licenses, some of these things have gone up 150, 200%. So how are they to be able to compete with money that may or may not be real? And I think that's one of the things we need to keep in mind here, is that the speculation is just like you see in the Vancouver real estate market, and we know that money is not real.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Just to clarify, the letter I was referencing was addressed to Minister Joyce Murray. Just for clarification. My next question is to Dr. Silver. Dr. Silver, we heard from just now from Mr. Landsbergen and from many, many others, something that we're all aware of is the need for more information and more data. And I'm wondering if you can elaborate a little bit on some of those thoughts and around the importance, or if you feel it is important for us to have a public, transparent registry that clearly articulates who owns the licenses and so on.
Yes, thank you for the question. There are a few reasons why I would advocate for that. I mean, the first is as a researcher and someone who occasionally gets called to speak with folks like you and would like to be able to, as an independent from parliamentary proceedings and from DFO, to be able to bring data and evidence that answers in specific ways and beyond just the sort of single year that I've been able to look at in the research, patterns that we can see in ownership and how licenses and quota are being used. So there's the research piece and being able to bring evidence into the conversation. And I think from when we think about fisheries management, right, so the work that DFO does, it wants to be making decisions about all sorts of things based on evidence, right? It makes decisions about total allowable catch for year based on biological and ecological data, and it evaluates year after year the fisheries and the health of the stocks based on that data. So it would be wonderful in parallel to have data that against which sort of social, economic, cultural considerations can get assessed and evaluated, right? This would allow for more systematic consideration of socioeconomic and cultural aspects of the fisheries if this sort of information were available.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. We'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 4 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses again. I'll start with Dr. Silver, if I could. Dr. Silver, you mentioned that there are 38 access-rich portfolios in BC with 20 or more licenses and 6 of those with 50 or more. Would you be able to provide the committee with a summary of those? It would be those access-rich portfolios would be, I think, very beneficial for this committee.
Yes, I can do that. In fact, short answer, yes, because I don't want to take up any more of your time. Yes, I will do that.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any idea why it is so complicated to try and sort out who owns what, and the work that you had to go through, that you basically had to create software systems in order to sift through the data.
Yeah.
Why would the department that is responsible for this not have a better tracking system?
I mean, I think that the answer is because there's complicated ownership information. There's the license holder, the license operator. In some fisheries, that there are vessels, right? The license is allocated to a vessel. What else? We have the quota that then the license may be fished on the license. And these are all fisheries that are managed quite separately. Like there's an integrated fisheries management plan for salmon. There's an integrated fisheries management plan for herring, which there's different groups of folks who are responsible for those plans. So when you're thinking about it bureaucratically, it's very complicated. I don't know what the internal systems it looks like for them when a license is registered for the year. You'd like to think that there's some way to design a system, and I think they are working on this based on testimony I heard from Monday, to when a license is registered each year that it feeds into a database that automatically populates, right? It's expensive to do that. We need good software engineers.
Okay,
But
thank
we have
you.
other jurisdictions do that type of thing.
Thank you. I'll go to Mr. Landsbergen now, if I can. Mr. Landsbergen, can you provide any information on the effect of fish stocks, the assessments and so on the value of licenses? Healthy stocks lead to a higher value of licenses. Lower stocks lead to lower prices. Can you provide anything that way?
I don't have any data to provide on that, but certainly the description you made makes sense to me that the more abundant a particular fish stock is, the more stable the future revenue potential would be, and therefore greater value of access to that stock.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Olson, it seems that there's a desire for more access for the people you represent. Is that the case? Do you have individuals wanting to get into the industry? We've heard anecdotal reports of some communities with having a hard time finding young people wanting to enter the sector. Can you provide any information on that?
I think in the communities that I work for, many of them have lots of young people that are interested in engaging in the fishing business, the community fishing enterprises. One of the challenges is the cost of the vessel, the opportunity, and the fact that they need to relearn some of these skills, just like they do on the East Coast, where they're re-engaging and participating in commercial fishings. They've done smaller scale local, and one of the shifts that's happening is shifting towards more community-based fishing for Indigenous people and smaller scale, smaller vessels, multiple species. So we've been involved in some of that. And one of the communities that I work for in Port Alberni, they have hundreds of fishermen in their community that are from age 15 to 90, and they're participating in a owner-operator. The nation has the license access, and the community members benefit wholly from the opportunity. The nation doesn't get any revenue from the fishery. An example to Mike's question earlier was, you've got fishermen in that community that are going to generate $800,000 in a Chinook opening in one night in August. That $800,000 is then going to turn into almost $8 million to that community, because those people are going to spend that money around and around and around in that community, and they spend it all there. They don't take it somewhere else. They don't live in Vancouver. They live in Port Alberni, a community of 25,000 people, where a shot of $8 million into that economy's arm in one night makes a huge difference. And those communities and the people, the mayors, all the people that understand the wealth that stays there from those fishermen and those small scale opportunities are what we need to build on here. That's what we're here fighting for, is those fishermen having an opportunity to keep that money and grow the economy where they live.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. Gone a bit over. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy to close us out, please.
Was not expecting to be back at it, but we can certainly have a question here. I mean, to Mr. Olson, we also hear that some bands they'll have access to licenses and quota, but they turn around and lease it out, just like some of the other operators we've been talking about. Should that also be addressed, or would that be a big hit to their revenue, basically, for the band?
So yeah, that's a complicated situation. That's a situation that I find myself in as a person that runs a business that is based on leasing licenses to fishermen to drive revenue into an economy for First Nations for their bottom line. That's the challenge that I'm up against, is providing opportunities for those fishermen that don't own licenses and can't afford to buy one. So they have to lease. That's the only way that they have an opportunity to participate in the fishing business. They can't afford to buy an $800,000 license. Their return on investment doesn't make sense. The challenge
if I could, Mr. Olson, I have one more question, and it would go to Ms. Silver. The 2019 report, sharing risks and benefits, had a lot of recommendations. Have you been able to pick the ones that would actually make the most sense and the most beneficial impact?
Oh, geez. You're stretching the limits of my memory. We've spoken about the transparency piece and how I think making the availability of license holdings, like that if DFO was to make something searchable available, then that would make a big difference with respect to transparency and being able to understand and monitor the issue. I will have to stop there because I don't have the report in front of me and I'm blanking on recommendations in the report.
Not a problem. Maybe you could submit something that would give us a bit of a direction. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we're out of time now, aren't we?
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. We're right on the button for 6 o'clock where we have a dead stop to. So, of course, want to thank Dr. Silver, Mr. Landsbergen and Mr. Olson for appearing before committee today and sharing their valuable information with the committee as we do this report. So again, I will remind members that next week we will continue receiving testimony from witnesses for this particular study. I want to thank Mr. Waugh for subbing in for Mr. Bragdon in his exit, and thank him for lifting the level of intelligence on that side of the table when the change out. So again, meeting adjourned. Enjoy your weekend. Thank you to all the staff for making this meeting possible here today.